I must go now.
Return to me.
I will.
Be safe.
The contract she never read. In the year 1878, the world was not kind to women who stood alone. At 19 years old, Margaret Eliza Whitmore learned that lesson in the most unforgiving way possible. She stood by the window of her late parents' Boston home, watching horse-drawn carriages pass on the cobblestone street below. Once, this house had been filled with warmth, her mother's laughter, her father's steady voice. Now it echoed only with silence and obligation. Behind her, seated at the dining table, was Uncle Theodore Whitmore, a man of stiff posture, sharp eyes, and colder priorities. "You cannot stay here any longer," he said flatly. Margaret turned. "This is my home." "It was," he corrected. "Now it is an expense." Her fingers curled into her dress. "I've done nothing wrong." "No," he replied, pulling a folded document from his coat. "But you are unmarried, 19, and entirely dependent. That is wrong enough." He placed the paper on the table and slid it toward her. The title stared back at her like a sentence already passed. Mail order marriage agreement. Her breath caught. This is for women going west," she whispered. "Yes," Theodore said. "Arizona Territory." She looked up slowly. "Who is the man?" There was a pause, not out of kindness, but calculation. "An Apache," he said. The word struck her like a blow. "That's impossible," Margaret said, shaking her head. "You can't be serious." "He is respected among his people," Theodore continued, unmoved. "Educated. A landholder. He paid well." Paid. Her stomach turned. "I won't go," she said, standing abruptly. "I refuse." Her uncle rose as well, his shadow stretching across the floor. "You have no dowry. No inheritance. No future here," he said coldly. "This contract ensures your survival. You will sign." She stared at the document. Her name was already typed at the bottom. With trembling fingers and a heart full of quiet terror, Margaret signed. Not because she agreed. Because she had no choice. The contract she never read. In the year 1878, the world was not kind to women who stood alone. At 19 years old, Margaret Eliza Whitmore learned that lesson in the most unforgiving way possible. She stood by the window of her late parents' Boston home, watching horse-drawn carriages pass on the cobblestone street below. Once, this house had been filled with warmth, her mother's laughter, her father's steady voice. Now it echoed only with silence and obligation. Behind her, seated at the dining table, was Uncle Theodore Whitmore, a man of stiff posture, sharp eyes, and colder priorities. "You cannot stay here any longer," he said flatly. Margaret turned. "This is my home." "It was," he corrected. "Now it is an expense." Her fingers curled into her dress. "I've done nothing wrong." "No," he replied, pulling a folded document from his coat. "But you are unmarried, 19, and entirely dependent. That is wrong enough." He placed the paper on the table and slid it toward her. The title stared back at her like a sentence already passed. Mail order marriage agreement. Her breath caught. This is for women going west," she whispered. "Yes," Theodore said. "Arizona Territory." She looked up slowly. "Who is the man?" There was a pause, not out of kindness, but calculation. "An Apache," he said. The word struck her like a blow. "That's impossible," Margaret said, shaking her head. "You can't be serious." "He is respected among his people," Theodore continued, unmoved. "Educated. A landholder. He paid well." Paid. Her stomach turned. "I won't go," she said, standing abruptly. "I refuse." Her uncle rose as well, his shadow stretching across the floor. "You have no dowry. No inheritance. No future here," he said coldly. "This contract ensures your survival. You will sign." She stared at the document. Her name was already typed at the bottom. With trembling fingers and a heart full of quiet terror, Margaret signed. Not because she agreed. Because she had no choice. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Taza opened the chest. Inside were legal documents, land deeds, stamped and signed. "I place half of my land," he said clearly, "and all future trade profits, in her name." The priest gasped. The officials stared in disbelief. Margaret's knees nearly gave way. Tarza turned to her. "You were not bought," he said quietly. "You were chosen." In that moment, everything Margaret believed about her fate, and about him, began to change. And she did not yet know that this gift would shake more than just her future. Under the same sky, the murmurs did not stop even after the chest was closed. Margaret stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Half the land. In her name. The words echoed as if spoken again and again by the wind itself. She looked at Tarza Grey Hawk, really looked at him this time. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "I did," he replied. There was no pride in his tone, only certainty. "Because it is right." That unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. Leaving the crowd behind, they departed before sunset. Margaret expected instructions, rules, control. Instead, Tarza mounted his horse and waited. "You may ride beside me," he said, gesturing calmly. "Or behind. Your choice." Choice. She swallowed and mounted the horse beside him. The land opened wide around them. Red earth, low brush, distant mountains cutting the horizon. The sky felt vast, almost overwhelming, as if it could swallow her fears whole. "You live on the reservation?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," Tarza answered. "Near it." They rode past the clustered dwellings she had imagined, heading instead toward the foothills. "Is this where you live?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Then added, "If you wish to live here." Her heart skipped. "If I wish." He nodded once. "I will not cage you, Margaret." The way he spoke her name, carefully, respectfully, made her chest tighten. His home. The house was modest but solid, built with skill and patience. Not grand, but strong. Inside, everything was prepared. A private room. A bed with clean linens. A chest for her belongings. "You will sleep here," Tarza said. "I will sleep in the outer room." She turned sharply. "But we are married." "Marriage without consent is not marriage," he replied evenly. No man had ever said that to her. "You owe me nothing," he continued. "Not your body. Not your obedience. Only honesty." Something cracked open inside her, something painful and frightening. "Why?" she asked. Tarza looked toward the doorway, where the mountains burned gold in the fading light. "Because my people have had enough taken from them," he said quietly. "I will not be another man who takes." The first night. Night settled softly. Margaret lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the low crackle of a fire. He was awake. She knew it. There was no knock. No footsteps at her door. Only silence and respect. She rose at last and opened the door. Tarza sat by the fire, carving a piece of wood with slow, practiced movements. He looked up without surprise. "You cannot sleep," he said. "No," she admitted. "Sit," he offered. She did, the warmth of the fire easing the tightness in her chest. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked directly. Margaret hesitated. "I was taught to be." "And now?" "I'm uncertain." A faint smile touched his lips. "That is closer to the truth." A promise spoken aloud. "There is something you should know," Tarza said after a moment. "If you decide to leave, tomorrow, or any day, I will not stop you." She looked up sharply. "Even if I leave you?" "Even then." They were not words of romance. They were words of dignity. For the first time in her life, Margaret felt like more than a solution to someone else's problem. Eyes upon her. Morning brought attention. Women watched her, quietly, carefully. Some curious. Some wary. Some openly disapproving. She felt it acutely. She was not merely an outsider. She was a white woman who now held Apache land. An older woman approached her at last. "Are you treated well?" she asked plainly. Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I am safe." The woman nodded once. "That is enough, for now." The first threat. That evening, a government official arrived on horseback, his expression tight. "This arrangement will cause trouble," he said coldly. "A white woman holding Apache land. That will not sit well." Tarza's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. The land belongs to itself. He replied, "We are only its guardians." Margaret felt it then, clear and undeniable. This marriage was not just between two people. It was a challenge. And challenges invite enemies. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Margaret realized something else as well. Whatever she had been sent here to be, she was no longer powerless. The weight of names. Margaret did not sleep easily that night. The words of the government official echoed in her mind like a warning bell. This arrangement will cause trouble. She had crossed an ocean of expectations to arrive here, and now she stood at the center of something far larger than herself. Land, power, identity, and a marriage that neither side of the world fully understood. Morning among strangers. At dawn, the land awakened gently. Margaret stepped outside, drawn by the cool air and the pale pink sky stretching endlessly above the mountains. The earth smelled different here, dry, honest, unashamed of itself. She wrapped her shawl tighter as footsteps approached. Tarza stopped several paces away, giving her space as always. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she answered truthfully. "Enough to think." He nodded. Thinking can be heavier than labor. She surprised herself by smiling, learning the unspoken rules. As the morning passed, Margaret began to notice things she had missed before. No one spoke loudly around Tarza. Not out of fear, but respect. Decisions were not announced, they were discussed. Elders gathered beneath the shade of a large mesquite tree, speaking in low tones. Tarza listened more than he spoke. She watched him carefully. He was not a ruler. He was a bridge. A young woman approached Margaret cautiously, offering her a bowl of water. "Thank you," Margaret said, unsure if the gesture would be understood. The woman hesitated, then nodded and smiled faintly. It was small, but it mattered, the name she carried. Later that afternoon, an elder requested Margaret's presence. She entered the shaded circle with a racing heart. The elder's eyes were sharp, assessing. "You carry many names," he said slowly. "Daughter, wife, white woman, owner of land." Margaret felt the weight of each word. "I did not ask for the land," she said carefully, "but I will not misuse it." The elder studied her for a long moment. "Land remembers how it is treated," he sighed. He said, "So do people." She nodded, understanding more than the words themselves conveyed. A secret from the past. That evening, as the sun sank low, Margaret finally spoke the truth she had carried like a stone in a chest. "I was not chosen because I was wanted," she said softly to Tarza. "I was sent because I was unwanted." He looked at her, listening. "My uncle needed me gone. I was inconvenient." Tarza's jaw tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "You were used," he said. "Yes." He met her gaze steadily. "Here, you will decide who you are." For the first time, Margaret believed it might be possible. Trouble takes shape. The sound of approaching horses cut through the calm. Two men arrived, settlers from the nearby town. Their eyes moved from Tarza to Margaret, lingering too long. "So this is her," one of them muttered. "The girl who owns Apache land." Margaret felt a chill. "This land is not for sale," Tarza said firmly. One of the men smirked. "Everything has a price." Tarza stepped forward, calm, immovable. "Not this." The men left, but not without promise in their eyes. Promise of return. Promise of conflict. A choice begins. That night, Margaret stood outside again, staring at the stars scattered like secrets across the sky. She had been sent here as a solution, a transaction, a mistake. But now she understood something clearly. She could leave. Tarza had given her that freedom. Yet for the first time in her life, staying felt like a choice, not a sentence. And choices, she was learning, were powerful things. Shadows on the horizon. The night was unusually still, almost as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Margaret felt it too, a tension in the air that spoke of trouble. She had been learning the rhythms of this land, the quiet ways it communicated danger, and tonight, every instinct whispered, something was coming. She stepped outside the house, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The stars above were bright, yet they offered no comfort. Tarza was already there, sitting near the fire, sharpening a spear. He looked up at her but said nothing, letting her come into the silence on her own terms. "Something's not right," Margaret whispered. Tarza's eyes narrowed slightly. "You feel it too," he said. "Good. Trust your senses." The arrival of threat. Before dawn, the sound of horses echoed across the foothills. Margaret's heart jumped. 2 men, settlers from the nearby town, rode toward the house, their intent clear in their posture. They were not visitors, not curious travelers. They were looking for a confrontation. Tarza stepped between Margaret and the intruders, his figure calm but formidable. "Leave," he said, his voice low and steady. "Now." The taller of the 2 men sneered. "We are not leaving. That land belongs to us, her or not." Margaret's breath caught. She had seen hostility before, but never this close, never directed at her. Tarza's hand rested lightly on the hilt of a knife. "I warned you." The men exchanged glances and then, with a muttered curse, retreated, but their eyes promised they would return. Margaret exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the reality she had entered. Lessons in defense. That day, Tarza began teaching Margaret about the land, about the ways of the Apache, about survival. She learned quickly how to ride across rocky terrain, how to read the tracks of animals and humans alike, how to move silently and observe without being seen. Each lesson carried a subtle truth. Her safety, and the safety of the land she now partially owned, depended not only on Tarza but also on her own courage. By evening, Margaret realized something remarkable. She was no longer just a bride, a passive figure. She was a participant in her own story, facing threats, making choices, and testing her strength. Trust and tensions. Despite the growing bond, tension lingered. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted one night, sitting by the fire. Tarza looked at her steadily. "You can," he said. "You already are. You are stronger than you think." Margaret felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time, she believed it. But there was still uncertainty. Outside forces were closing in. The settlers would return, and with them, danger she could not yet fully imagine. The first real test. 2 days later, the threat came again, but this time, with more than words. As Margaret was walking near the edge of the property, she saw them, 3 men on horseback, approaching fast, weapons ready. They shouted insults, trying to provoke a reaction. Tarza appeared beside her, his presence calm but unyielding. "Do not run," he said. "Stand. Show them we are not afraid." Margaret's pulse raced. For a moment, she considered fleeing. Then she looked at Tarza, at the land he had sworn to protect, at the chest he had given her, and something shifted. She planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and met the men's gaze. For the first time, she realized that being chosen, being given power, meant responsibility. And she was ready to claim it. A bond solidifying. Later that night, after the men had retreated, Margaret and Tarza sat together in silence. "You did well today," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "No," he corrected gently. "You did it yourself. I guided you, yes. But it was you who stood. You who faced them." For the first time, Margaret felt the full weight of what he had given her. Trust, respect, freedom, and the chance to become more than she had ever imagined. But she also knew. The dangers were far from over. The settlers would come again, and next time, the stakes would be higher. And somewhere in the shadows, another challenge awaited, one that would test not just her courage, but the fragile bond growing between her and Tarza. Trials of fire. The sun rose red and sharp over the Arizona horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged land. Margaret stood on the ridge, watching the settlers' trail from yesterday disappear into the distance. The memory of their hostility lingered like a storm cloud she could not shake. Tarza approached silently, as he always did, his calm presence grounding her. "They will return," he said simply. Margaret nodded. "And we must be ready." Lessons in strategy. That morning, Tarza began teaching her more than survival. He taught her strategy. How a person stands, he said, is not just for themselves, but for those they protect. He showed her how to anticipate movement, how to read the signs of approaching danger long before it arrives. Margaret absorbed it all, her mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. For the first time, she realized that land, like life, is a battlefield, and she would need courage, wit, and strength to survive it. an unexpected bond. Days turned into weeks and into weeks. The more time Margaret spent with Taza, the more she understood him, not just as a protector or a husband in name, but as a man of principle, vision, and unwavering honor. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke. "I never expected any of this," she said. "Not the land, not you, not even myself." Taza smiled faintly, never taking his eyes from the flames. "You were sent here," he said softly, "but it was not to be owned or commanded. You were sent to choose." Margaret felt something inside her shift. Fear was still present, but it was now tempered with determination. She was no longer just a bride in someone else's story. She was beginning to author her own. A new thread emerges. The peace was short-lived. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from the nearby town. His message was brief, but it carried weight heavier than any physical weapon. "The settlers have organized. They intend to claim your land by force." Margaret's stomach tightened. This was no longer a verbal threat. They were planning action. Taza's expression darkened. "They will not succeed," he said, his voice steady, yet his jaw was tight. "But we must prepare." Margaret felt a surge of resolve. She could no longer remain passive. Every lesson Taza had taught her was about to be tested. Training in firelight. Over the next few days, Taza trained Margaret in ways she had never imagined. Not just survival, but leadership, observation, strategy, decisiveness. He put her in situations where hesitation could mean failure. She stumbled at first, but each misstep became a lesson. And with every lesson, her confidence grew. "I am not who I was," she admitted one night. "I am stronger." Taza studied her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Yes," he said. "And you will need that strength soon. The men coming are not merely greedy, they are desperate." A stirring of feelings. Even as tension mounted, Margaret found herself noticing the little things. The way Taza's eyes softened when he spoke to her. The way he never assumed obedience, only trust. The careful respect in every gesture, every word. She had not expected to feel anything beyond fear and obligation. But now, the faint beginnings of admiration, and something deeper, breathed quietly within her. It scared her almost as much as the approaching threat. A test of will. One evening, Taza handed her a folded map. "This is your land, in every way that matters," he said. "Tomorrow, you will decide how to confront them." Margaret looked down at the lines, the ridges, the streams, and hills she had come to know. For the first time, she understood fully what it meant to be chosen, not by someone else, but by circumstance, by fate, by courage. And she was ready. The first confrontation. Dawn had barely broken when the sound of hooves shook the quiet of the foothills. Margaret was already awake, standing by the edge of the plateau, scanning the horizon. "They're coming," she whispered, almost to herself. Taza Grey Hawk appeared silently beside her, his presence steady as the mountains. "Yes, they are," he said. "Are you ready?" Margaret's stomach tightened, but she nodded. She had trained, learned, and grown. Fear still existed, but it was tempered by determination. Facing the settlers. The settlers arrived in a small group, their horses kicking up dust as they rode aggressively toward the property. Weapons were drawn, and the leader sneered at Margaret and Taza. "You think a girl and a few men can stop us?" he spat. "This land belongs to us, whether she owns it or not." Taza did not flinch. "It belongs to itself," he said firmly. "We are only its guardians." Margaret's pulse raced. She could feel the power of the land beneath her feet, the same land she had begun to love, and a surge of courage pushed through her chest. Margaret's first decision. Taza turned to her. "This is your moment. You decide what to do." Margaret took a deep breath. She remembered all of Taza's lessons: observation, strategy, patience. She knew that rash action could destroy them, but hesitation could invite disaster. She stepped forward, raising her voice so the settlers could hear. "This land is not yours to take. Leave now, or face the consequences." The settlers laughed mockingly, but Margaret noticed a flicker of doubt in their eyes. She had never commanded anyone before, yet somehow, her words carried authority. The clash. The men did not leave. They tried to circle the property, attempting to intimidate Taza and Margaret into submission. Taza moved silently, positioning himself and Margaret strategically. With every approach of the settlers, Margaret anticipated their moves. She called out, guided, and even acted to block their paths. Taza watched, impressed by her courage and quick thinking. It was the first time she truly realized she was no longer just a bride. She was a defender. Revelation in the firelight. That evening, after the settlers retreated, Margaret and Taza sat by the fire. Margaret's hands were raw, her clothes torn, but she felt alive in a way she had never known. "You did well today," Taza said softly. "Better than I expected." Margaret shook her head. "No. You guided me, taught me how to think, how to act." Taza looked at her, his dark eyes revealing something unspoken. "You did more than learn. You became part of this land. It recognized you." Margaret felt a shiver run through her. For the first time, she understood the depth of what he had given her, not just land or protection, but respect, freedom, and a place in a world she had never imagined. A hidden past. As the fire crackled, Taza's gaze softened, but a shadow crossed his face. "There is something you should know about me," he said quietly. "Before you came, before this land became yours in part, I have faced men like them before, and I have secrets that, if revealed, could change everything." Margaret's breath caught. "Secrets?" He nodded slowly. "Not all of them are mine to share yet, but soon they may determine whether we survive this together." Her heart pounded. Danger had come from the outside today, but now she realized that danger could also come from knowledge, history, and choices yet to be revealed. And she knew this was only the beginning. Secrets and storms. The sun had barely risen over the desert when Margaret woke to the distant sound of hooves once again. But this time, the tension was heavier, the air thick with anticipation. She dressed quickly, her hands trembling with adrenaline. Taza was already outside, standing tall and silent, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They're back," he said calmly. "And this time, they bring more than words." Margaret swallowed hard. She had grown stronger in the last days, but fear still lurked in the shadows of her mind. The second attack. By mid-morning, a larger group of settlers arrived, riding aggressively toward their land. Some carried guns. Others wielded clubs and ropes. Their intentions were unmistakable. They intended to take the land by force. Margaret's heart pounded. She looked at Taza. "Stay close," he said softly. "And remember what I taught you. Your mind is your strongest weapon." Margaret nodded, clutching the rifle Taza had lent her. She had never fired a gun before, but the desert and her circumstances had taught her to adapt quickly. Strategy in action. Taza and Margaret moved together, positioning themselves on higher ground. Margaret noticed every movement, every approach, anticipating the settlers' actions. "Now," Taza whispered, "use your voice first." Margaret stepped forward, shouting commands and warnings. Her presence carried authority, startling the men who had assumed a timid young bride would cower. They hesitated, then tried a flanking maneuver. Margaret anticipated it and signaled Taza. Within moments, the settlers were forced to retreat again, this time with bruised pride and shaken confidence. Margaret felt a surge of exhilaration. She had fought. She had won, not just with weapons, but with presence, wit, and courage. Taza's secret revealed. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Taza finally opened up. "There is something you must know about me," he said quietly, his eyes distant. "Before you arrived, I had enemies. Ones who would not hesitate to destroy anyone close to me. The land you now share was once my shield, my refuge, my home. But it was also a target. And the settlers, they are not the only danger." Margaret listened, sensing the weight in his voice. "You've seen me calm," he continued, "but I have fought and survived battles you cannot imagine. And some of my choices, secrets I carry, may test your trust, Margaret." Her chest tightened. "What kind of secrets?" Taza looked at her steadily. "Secrets of blood, loyalty, and old debts. Ones that could cost us everything if revealed at the wrong moment." Margaret swallowed. Fear and curiosity mingled in her chest. She realized that surviving the settlers was only the first test. There were other storms ahead, ones born from the past. A growing bond. Despite the tension, a fragile trust had formed between them. Margaret felt it, cautiously, like sunlight after a storm. "You've changed," Tarza said quietly. "You are no longer just a bride. You are part of this land, part of its people, part of me." Margaret looked at him, uncertainty and admiration mixing in her gaze. I am learning," she admitted. "And that learning will be crucial," he said. "For what is coming next, you will need all your strength, all your courage, and all your mind." The calm before the storm. Night fell. The desert was quiet, deceptive in its serenity. Margaret lay awake, thinking of the day's events. She had faced danger. She had fought. She had proven herself. But deep down, she knew the challenges were far from over. The settler's hatred would not vanish, and Tarza's secrets, those shadows he carried, loomed over her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the hills, forces were gathering, forces that would push both of them to the brink. Margaret realized survival would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, faith, and the kind of love that could withstand secrets, threats, and the weight of destiny. The siege of the land. The morning sun was pale and harsh, casting long shadows across the rugged hills. Margaret stood at the edge of the property, scanning the horizon. Her heart beat fast, but there was no fear, only determination. Tarza approached silently, his face calm but resolute. "They've returned," he said quietly. "This time, they bring everything they've gathered." Margaret nodded. She had prepared, learned, and grown stronger. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. The settlers' attack. By midday, a larger group of settlers appeared, riding aggressively toward the land. Guns, ropes, and crude weapons glinted in the sunlight. Their leader, a tall man with a cruel grin, shouted insults, hoping to provoke a reaction. Tarza moved in front of Margaret, his presence commanding. "This is your land," he said firmly, "and you will not take it." Margaret felt a surge of power. She lifted the rifle Tarza had given her, her hand steady. The lesson she had learned, the strategy, observation, patience, guided every movement. A battle of wits and courage. The settlers attempted to flank them, but Margaret anticipated their moves. She signaled Tarza, and together they countered every maneuver. Margaret's voice carried commands. Her presence instilled doubt in their attackers. Shots were fired, dust and dirt rose, and the sound of hooves thundered across the land. Margaret realized that this was not just survival. It was claiming a place in a world that had once sought to control her. When the dust settled, the settlers retreated, bruised, humiliated, but not defeated. The cost of victory. Later, Margaret and Tarza sat by the fire, silent. The night was quiet now, the land itself seeming to exhale. "You did well today," Tarza said softly. "Better than I expected." Margaret began, then stopped. Words failed her. She had faced danger, led, and fought alongside him. She had learned to trust herself, to trust him. Tarza studied her, his dark eyes revealing something unspoken. "You are no longer just a bride. You are part of this land. Part of me. Part of what we protect." Margaret felt warmth in her chest, a fragile, tentative trust growing into something stronger. The revelation of the past. That night, Tarza finally shared the secret he had hinted at before. "There is something you must know," he said quietly, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Before you came, I faced enemies that sought to destroy me and this land. My father's enemies, old debts of blood and honor, have followed me here. Some of them are among the settlers. They will not stop until they have taken everything." Margaret listened, realizing the weight of what he carried. The danger was far larger than she had imagined. "Then we fight together," she said firmly. "All of it. Every threat. Every secret. I won't back down." Tarza's gaze softened. "I knew you would say that," he said. A bond forged in fire. Outside, the wind swept across the desert. Inside, the fire crackled, illuminating two figures who had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and emerged stronger. Margaret had arrived as a bride, forced into a life she did not choose. Now, she was a partner, a defender, a woman who had found courage she never knew existed. And as Tarza placed a protective hand over hers, she realized that the greatest gift of all had nothing to do with land, contracts, or survival. It was trust, respect, and the beginning of a bond that could withstand storms yet to come. The calm before the next storm. They did not yet know what the future held. The settlers would return. Old enemies lingered in the shadows. Secrets could unravel at any moment. But for now, under the wide Arizona sky, Margaret and Taza allowed themselves a moment of peace. A moment to acknowledge that together, they could face anything. The land stretched endlessly before them, and for the first time, Margaret felt that it was truly hers, not because it was given, but because she had fought, endured, and chosen to. The final confrontation. The desert sun rose harsh and unrelenting, casting long shadows across the rocky land. Margaret stood beside Taza, feeling the tension in every rustle of the wind, every distant bird call. Today, there would be no mistakes. "They are coming," Taza said quietly, his voice calm but sharp. "This is the last challenge. We cannot falter." Margaret nodded, her hand brushing the rifle at her side. Her courage had grown through weeks of danger, strategy, and survival. Today, it would be tested like never before. The settlers' last stand. By midday, a large contingent of settlers appeared, riding aggressively across the plateau. Their leader, the same cruel man from before, spurred his horse forward, sneering. "This ends today," he shouted. "Your land, your woman, everything is ours." Margaret felt a chill, but Taza's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Remember your training. Observe. Decide. Act." She breathed deeply, scanning the attackers, anticipating their every move. For the first time, she truly felt the unity of mind and body, of thought and action. A test of trust. Taza stepped forward to negotiate, knowing the settlers would not be swayed easily. Margaret remained behind, observing, ready to act. Suddenly, one of the men charged toward her. Margaret did not panic. She raised her rifle and fired a warning shot that echoed across the hills. The man froze, then stumbled back. Taza's eyes met hers. There was no surprise, only trust. She realized then that this bond, forged in danger and respect, was unbreakable, the turning point. The settlers, seeing Margaret's resolve and Taza's calm strategy, began to hesitate. They had underestimated her. They had assumed fear, weakness, and submission, but Margaret had none to give. She stepped forward, voice firm and commanding. "Leave this land. You have no claim here. Return home, or face the consequences." For a moment, silence fell. The wind carried her words, the land itself seeming to support her. The settlers, disheartened and intimidated, finally turned their horses and fled, muttering threats that were hollow in the face of her courage. The gift revealed. After the danger passed, Taza took Margaret by the hand and led her to the carved chest, the same chest he had given her at the wedding. "You have earned more than land," he said softly. He opened it, revealing additional deeds and legal papers. "This gift is not just land or property. It is recognition of your courage, your strength, and the trust we share. You are no longer merely a bride. You are my partner in all things." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She realized that the true gift was not material. It was respect, equality, and the chance to define her own life. A new beginning. That night, under the vast Arizona sky, Margaret and Taza sat beside the fire. The stars stretched endlessly above them, as if promising infinite possibilities. "I never imagined I could be this strong," Margaret whispered. "You were always capable," Taza replied. "You just needed the chance to see it yourself." Margaret smiled faintly, realizing that she had found not only safety but purpose, trust, and a bond deeper than she had ever known. The settlers' threat was gone, for now, but Margaret understood that life in the West was a constant test of courage and choice. And for the first time, she felt ready to face it, not as a frightened girl, but as a woman who had claimed her life, her land, and her destiny. The gift of freedom. The dawn broke over the horizon with a golden fire, painting the rugged cliffs and the red desert soil in hues of promise and renewal. Margaret awoke to the sound of the wind rustling through the sagebrush, and for the first time in months, she felt a calm that wasn't burdened by fear or uncertainty. The settlers had been repelled, their threats dispersed by courage, strategy, and sheer will. Yet, the real challenge, the one that would define her and Taza's future, was about to unfold. She stepped outside, feeling the earth beneath her boots, solid and familiar. It no longer felt alien. The land had begun to recognize her as one of its own, and in return, she embraced it fully, understanding its rhythms, its secrets, and its silent strength. Taza emerged from the small house, his expression serene but imbued with gravity. He approached Margaret slowly, as if measuring the moment before speaking. "Today is different," he said quietly. "Not because the settlers are gone, they may return, but because today you will understand the full meaning of what I gave you on our wedding day." Margaret tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. She remembered the chest he had presented to her, the one that had seemed a simple gesture at first. But now she sensed that the true gift was something far greater than she had imagined. The gathering. By mid-morning, the Apache elders gathered at the Centra Mesa, their faces etched with wisdom and centuries of history. Taza led Margaret to the center, and all eyes turned to her. She felt a flicker of nervousness but recalled all she had learned: patience, respect, observation, and courage. "You have faced danger," one elder began, his voice deep and resonant, "and you have stood beside our people, not as a stranger, but as a guardian." Margaret listened intently, her heart swelling. She understood now that her journey had not been merely about surviving, but about earning trust and recognition. Then Taza spoke. "Margaret has proven her strength and loyalty. Today, she receives a gift, not of wealth, not of land alone, but of freedom, respect, and choice. She is no longer bound by obligation, only by the bond we share." Whispers traveled through the crowd. Margaret realized that the entire community understood the significance of the moment. The true gift. Taza led Margaret to the chest once more. He opened it slowly, revealing a bundle of documents and papers, carefully preserved. "These papers," he said, "represent not just land deeds, but autonomy, authority, the right to govern, to protect, to lead alongside me. But the real gift, Margaret, is your freedom to choose. You may stay, or you may leave. You may accept responsibility, or you may forge your own path. Today, you own yourself fully." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She had been sent across the ocean as a bride, as someone unwanted, and now she stood as a woman recognized for her courage, her intellect, and her heart. The power to choose, freely and without constraint, was the most profound gift of all. She looked at Taza. "You trusted me," she whispered. "I always did," he replied, "even when the world did not." Recognition and celebration. The elders nodded in approval, and the entire community gathered to acknowledge Margaret's courage. There were drums, chants, and the slow rise of voices celebrating her journey. She had not only survived threats but had risen to meet them, learning the ways of the land, the people, and the man who had become her partner. For the first time, Margaret understood that she had been given not just land or safety, but a place where she belonged, a voice that mattered, and a partnership built on trust, respect, and equality. Reflection. That night, as Margaret sat by the fire with Taza, she reflected on everything that had brought her here. She had arrived as a mail-order bride, forced into a life she did not want. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty. She had fought alongside. Taza learned the ways of the Apache and discovered a strength she had never known. And now, as the firelight danced across their faces, she realized that the greatest gift was not in the chest, not in the land, not in the documents, but in the recognition of her own courage, her freedom, and the bond she shared with Taza. Taza reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You are free," he said softly, "but I hope you choose to stay. Not out of obligation, but because this is where you belong." Margaret smiled, feeling a deep, abiding certainty. "I choose to stay," she whispered, "because I belong here, with you." A new beginning. The desert night stretched out above them, vast and infinite. The stars shone brightly, reflecting the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. Margaret felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had been forced into a life once, but now she was free to shape it herself. The settlers' threats had been defeated. The past shadows had been confronted. And in the bond with Taza, Margaret had found love, not imposed, not demanded, but earned, chosen, and reciprocated. In the quiet of the night, the land itself seemed to approve, whispering through the wind, through the rustle of the sagebrush, and through the distant call of the desert birds. She was home. And with that, Margaret and Taza began a new chapter, together, not as master and bride, but as equals, partners, and guardians of a land that had accepted them both. The wedding gift. The final gift, the one that left everyone speechless, was not gold, jewels, or property alone. It was freedom, respect, and choice. Taza had ensured that Margaret's worth was never measured by obedience or obligation. He had trusted her, honored her courage, and given her a place where her voice mattered. In that chest, alongside the deeds, were symbols of empowerment, the tools to make decisions, the authority to lead, and the reassurance that she would never again be forced to live a life dictated by others. It was a gift that transcended material value, a gift that changed lives, a gift that could only be appreciated by someone brave enough to claim it. Margaret looked at Taza and whispered, "I understand now. Everything you gave me was life itself." And he smiled, knowing that the journey, the trials, and the struggles had led to this perfect moment of mutual respect, love, and freedom. The desert wind carried their laughter, mingling with the soft whispers of the land. It was no longer a place of fear, but a home, a sanctuary, and the beginning of a future crafted together.